Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? The answer is Deals. This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On this show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, joint ventures, strategic alliances, real estate, affiliate and sponsorship deals, franchising, and more. My name is Corey Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for over 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the DealQuest podcast. Let's get started. Nahed Kairala is a relentless advocate for the extraordinary potential of fast-growing startups. Over the last decade, he has built a track record of transforming seven-figure companies into nine-figure powerhouses by turning HR into rocket fuel for their growth. His journey in scaling startups has been an exhilarating global expedition, taking him across the United States, Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. This experience has enriched his perspective on what it truly means to drive hypergrowth on a global scale across cultures. At Glorious Gaming, Nahed spearheaded the expansion from 40 to over 100 employees across 25 countries within 8 months, implementing innovative HR programs that fueled rapid growth and led the company to being named the fourth fastest growing company in Dallas. And then at Cumulus Synergy, he guided the company from a 20-person startup to over 150 employees within 18 months, achieving operational savings of over $2 million annually by building a lean and scalable HR operation. Nahed, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Corey. Glad to be here.
Well, listen, folks, I'm super excited to have Nahed on. I actually love it. Sometimes we have guests on who, by their bios, clearly, obviously deal people, whether they're investment bankers or whether they're, entrepreneurs who've sold a company. And then we have folks on that you may wonder what the deal connection is in their bio. And we get to discover that during this podcast because, it is a deals podcast and we only have people on who have a deal angle. So we'll get to discover it this time. But before we get to all that, Nahed, I want to take you back to when you were a little kid growing up, maybe 8, 10, 12 years old. What did you want to be? Because I'm guessing it had nothing to do with what you're doing now, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe HR and deals and scaling, hyperscaling companies was something you thought about as an 8-year-old, but I'm guessing not.
No, that's an amazing question. I actually wanted to be a cardiologist of all things. And there's a funny story behind it. I was always like the top of my class in biology, always loved the sciences and so forth. But one day, my father asked me a very straight up question. He's like, imagine the hospital calls you at 2 a.m. in the morning and someone's having heart failure. Would you get up and run to the hospital? I'm like, yeah, you probably need to wake me up. So like, yeah, that's not a good career for you. So that's kind of where that ended. But yeah, I definitely did not think I would go into the HR field. And I kind of stumbled into it by mistake though. But there were some precursors, given that I come from a family of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And having seen a lot of how businesses work, growing them, successes, failures, partnerships, deals, and so forth, which we could get into. I sort of diverged into that early on in my career after college days, but that's kind of how things. So yeah, when I was a little kid, definitely wasn't on my radar.
I love it. And one more question looking back. What was the first deal of any type that you did? It could be something small when you're younger or early in your career, whatever comes to mind is that was the first deal.
Yeah, actually, that's a very good question. So when I was 13 years old, basically, I used to sell custom records of like DJing and music and all that to school kids in my school. Okay. So I had an idea. I'm like, hey, why am I limiting myself to my school? Why don't I actually find people in other schools who I can work with? We'll strike a deal. They'll do all the legwork, the marketing and so forth. They get a commission and let me actually supply the goods for them. So I actually started talking to my friends, had my friends put me in touch with people within my area. And it actually helped me grow a small business at the time where like I was completely self-sufficient, did not need any money from my parents or so forth. Like I was paying for my cell phone bill, working with, with suppliers to get bulk, empty CDs to burn music on and so forth. So that was really the first deal kind of making that I did when I was younger.
I love it. A teenage entrepreneur after my own heart. I've told my version of that too many times, so I won't tell you, but I'll just say I relate. Okay, so I mean, listen, I sort of made a half, joke about it, whatever. And obviously there are hints in your bio about the companies you've worked with and helped scale significantly. But when we say HR, a lot of people will think, well, that isn't, what does that have to do with deals? You just help recruit and manage and set policies and create culture, whatever it is in these companies. And that's valuable, but it's not deal related. So where does the deal stuff come in?
No, I love that question. What you mentioned is pretty accurate. When people think of HR, they think of the stuff you just laid out. I think of it in a different perspective. I think HR has to be a business enabler. If HR does not help your business move forward, it is worthless to you as a business owner. Where the deals came in for me is that as a young entrepreneur, I started my first venture like in real business, like an actual company around 15, 16 years ago. And I had barely any contacts in the space. I was pretty fresh and new, and I didn't have the capital to even spend to even get the customers I wanted. So the first thing that made sense to me is, hey, why don't I partner with firms who I can complement with my skill set, but they can actually introduce me to the types of clientele that I'm interested in? So I ended up working with a lot of VCs and a lot of the big, consulting firms. You're talking like the McKinseys, the Boozes, these type of companies, where the deal for me was that, hey, I'm an HR expert here. I can give you complementary skills that you don't actually have in your repertoire. When you actually go and get a multi-million-dollar deal and there's an HR aspect to it, you can pass that over to me. I will do that under your company name so you don't lose any face or brand value, right? I, to your customer, am a part of your team. I'm getting the financial benefit and the exposure. They're getting the expertise and the ability to actually upsell to their customers. And that's kind of how I started off. Like, I think, after I had my first conversation with you and I took a step back, I'm like, I've never thought of deal making in the way that you and I had talked about it. But I mean, to be honest, I think I can clearly say that my career success is a result of deal making, really. That's one example. But there's a lot of examples where there's things that I was able to achieve that I could have never achieved on my own. But I had to come up with ideas and pitch a win-win situation to different companies, people, and so forth, to where everyone's happy and we all grow together. So that was really one of the first things that I did to start growing the business that I'm in.
I love that example because one of the things that I often say to folks that I was referring to is that, he's been a deal maker for his entire career, but he didn't necessarily put that label on himself, right? And in a pre-call we had, and just getting, I guess, familiar with my content, he was sort of like, oh yeah, I'm a deal maker kind of thing, right? And he obviously always was, but it just wasn't, he didn't apply that label to himself. And the thing is, as my listeners know, often I talk about that mindset of like shifting even from being an entrepreneur, obviously employee to entrepreneur is a mindset shift, but then there's an additional shift to being a deal maker. And one of the questions I often ask people to get them into that deal maker mindset, and without them even having to know what type of deal it is, okay, if you're trying to access a particular demographic, customer type, industry, geography, whatever it is, one of the first questions you should be asking is who already has access to that particular whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Category of potential clients that you have. And so many people don't even ask that question. They spend all the time trying to gather that organically. I'm not saying you shouldn't, that's not another route and you can't do it. But like you just naturally ask this key question, like who has access to these people? And what I love was able to do deals with much larger companies, right? Which is also like some people would think that would not be possible because of the size difference. Like, why would they care about me? But you said something very interesting, which was that you had an expertise, right, that filled, a need that they didn't have in-house already that allowed them to upsell additional services, right? So that's where the win-win part comes in. So I love the fact, like, I've been talking about these kind of things in my speeches and on my podcast for a long time. And you gave an example of at least two key things there, which is who has access and then what value can I bring, and size doesn't necessarily matter on that.
Yeah, to me, that's really the key. And you hit it on the head. Like whenever I'm thinking of, hey, what am I trying to achieve here? I think the first thing that I've learned to do over time is you need to be very realistic with what you're capable of doing, where your strengths are, and where you need complementary help, right? And help can come in different forms. It could be expertise, it could be capital, it could be market access, whatever that is. So what I've learned to do is anytime I'm thinking of an opportunity, I really just think of, hey, where do I bring value in this opportunity? Should it actually go through? And what are my capabilities today? What are the gaps that I need to fill in order to actually get to where I need to get to? And then and based on those criteria, I start identifying, okay, who are the potential partners? What are the potential deals I can make and so forth that will really help me to really, get this going pretty much. And to your point about larger companies, having worked with a lot of smaller businesses and companies, that are kind of starting to find scale, there is a misconception that the larger companies have it all figured out. They're perfect. There's no chink in their armor. But the more I've interfaced with companies like that, there's always a gap somewhere. There's always a need that needs to be filled. And it's really about how you position it, because a lot of times people think of them as competitors. Like for me, those companies aren't my competitors and I'm not their competitor because we operate in different spaces. But when we come together, we can actually grasp a lot of the same markets and it's a win-win and there's no cannibalization from one partner to the other. So that's kind of the angle I always look at when I'm thinking of these things.
Yeah, I love that. And then there was another piece that you said, which was that, you're doing it under their umbrella. And again, some people might push back on that because, they're trying to develop their own brand, whatever. But again, I mean, it could be so lucrative. And listen, and you're building personal relationships, right, with folks, despite the fact that it's under someone else's brand, that it's essentially, if it were a product or whatever, it might be called being white labeled, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So talk about that a little bit, like that decision to be not only comfortable, but have that be a part of the value you're providing, is that they don't have to make it seem like, oh, we got to bring in this other company or this other, separate entity to fulfill on the scope.
No, exactly. And I love that question. I learned early on, and again, I work in the service industry, right? When you're talking consulting, advisory, and so forth, it's a very service-oriented industry. And when service is based on two things, right? It's based on the relationships, but also the kind of quality that you deliver. Both have to happen together or else relationship doesn't work, right? You could be good friends with someone, but if you're not doing a good job, and you're not giving their money's worth, you're not going to be there for long. So for me, the decision was that first off, I'm small. I don't have a lot of customers yet. These big guys are going to be able to give me that access. And then it's up to me with my skill set and expertise to show the value. And then over time, actually building my personal brand. And at the same time, because I do not compete with those companies in the same market, what happened is that those companies and those customers that I'd worked with, once they knew that, hey, I'm actually working on my own and all that kind of stuff, they start actually referring some of the people they know to me, not necessarily working with me, because those kind of deals, there needs to be also some agreements that, hey, I'm not going to come in and poach your customer, right?
Right.
There's some ethics involved, and also just to make sure the relationship keeps working. But it actually opened up so many doors for me that I think a mistake I could have made is, and this is something I actually was apprehensive towards very, very early in my career, is that, hey, well, what if they take something away from what I could offer? What if they poach some of my clients and so forth? I think when you approach deal making in that fashion, you're already a step behind, because the way I like to approach it is, and how I like to position it always is, hey, what's in it for me? What's in it for you? How do we make sure that these don't conflict with each other? We're on the same page. Let's go. You win, I win. And we go from there.
Love it. Love it. So that was the approach from early on, which again is not an approach that a lot of people, take. I guess before I was going to move on to that, but before, like, do you have any insight? I mean, I think on our pre-call, I used the term unconscious confident, where there's just some of us, and I have that in certain areas where you're just really good at something and you just don't know why or how, right? Was it totally unconscious for you, or can you trace back where that thinking or that skill or that even approach came from?
Yeah, no, when I think about it, I think it's really through observing a lot of my family members who were entrepreneurs as well, primarily my parents, because my parents had a lot of small businesses over the years, like from mom and pop stores to other services and so forth. But a lot of them were built on complementary deals and partnerships with a lot of other counterparts. There was never any business I saw my parents build, which was completely from A to Z, them doing everything. There was always like, hey, this is what we're good at doing. This is what they're good at doing. Let's try and come up with a win-win situation. So I think I was sort of programmed from the early days to like, hey, don't try to boil the ocean all the time.
Yeah.
There's things that people are doing, which it's going to take you years to even come close to what they're delivering. Focus on what you're great at, your competitive advantage, and complement that with the remaining puzzle pieces to really accelerate your growth and to really accentuate the value you deliver. So I think that was ingrained in me in the early days because I observed it happen so much. And especially through my early teenage years, I actually was witness to some of them happening right in front of me. I'd be chilling at my dad's office or something, and I'd be just sitting there, and I'd hear some of these conversations and how things went. And my dad actually did a good job of, from the early days, really just trying to give me some like business guidance and advice and some of the things that, hey, why did I do this? Why did I do that? And some of the things along those lines. So I think I had a bit of that in me. But yeah, the application was a little unconscious until like I actually thought about it. So yeah.
Yeah, but it came, but you could trace it where it came from, or at least where
Yes.
inspired by it, let's say.
Yes.
Love that. Love that. So, it's really interesting for the listeners. I mean, it's so easy for people who are less familiar with deals or just starting out early and, to say, oh, well, I got to learn about all these different deals. Like, what is a white labeling deal? What is a joint venture? What, it could be a subcontracting, it could have been a subcontract, could have been a joint venture, could have been a strategic alliance. It gets very confusing. And that's why I try to simplify it, because I say, listen, you don't need to know what the deal looks like in the early days. You just need to know really just what Nahad said. It's like, what are you bringing to the table? What do you need from them? What do they bring to the table? What's the benefit to them for you? What's that win-win, so to speak? And then hopefully you get the right people who do have deal experience, and they say, okay, these are the options on how we can do it. We can do a white label deal. We can do a joint venture. We can do a strategic alliance. We can do a subcontracting arrangement. We can do a joint marketing deal, whatever it is, right? It's not important. The question is, where are you now? What is each party bringing to the table? Where do you want to end up, right? And then some professionals can help you with the structuring.
Yeah, to your point, the conversation and where the deal ends up will actually guide what kind of deal is actually more relevant and actually fit for purpose. But I agree with you. Like I never went to any deal thinking in the back of my mind, like, hey, this is going to be a white label in the year, this is going to be a strategic alliance. Because a lot of times you don't know those details until you get involved in a very serious conversation about what this happens. And then, you start putting your cards on the table on both sides, then things start to clarify. And then there's some types of deals which will not make sense based on the conversation, while others will be like, yeah, this is a surefire white label operation, for example. So yeah, I completely agree with you. If you get too hung up on the details early on without actually knowing what the details are going to be, you're not doing yourself any favors.
Yeah. And then, so, especially with bigger players, sometimes they have a way they like to do the deals. And then you got to decide, if that's the way they do these things, you got to decide whether that works for you. Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can tell you about an incredible resource my team and I have put together for you. Secrets of Deal-Driven Growth, Creative Ways to Grow Your Business, Even in Challenging Times, is a powerful ebook that helps you take DealQuest podcast episodes and apply them to your own life and business. This is the ideal tool for anyone looking for creative ways to grow as deal makers, and you can get yours now. It's as easy as heading to CoreyCupford.com/workbook and downloading your copy. While you're there, you can also consider joining our dynamic deal-driven community of founders, experts, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. Now back for the show. So let's bring it forward a little bit now. So, you started out with this somewhat unconscious but understandable, inspiration for just having that mentality. Talk to us about some of these other companies you were involved in and the deals you've done and how it applied, throughout your career.
Yeah, definitely. So as I started experiencing some success with the consulting, I started thinking about diversification. And one of the things with consulting is that it's very like, if you don't put in your own hours, you don't make any money. It's not very scalable unless you scale headcount. And I was doing that, but the problem with that always is that it's a lot of legwork. It's a lot of heavy operations. It's a lot of heavy investment and so forth. And the time you need to spend between training folks as well, delivering with customers and all that kind of stuff, it just makes it, humans don't scale well, right, generally speaking. So I started thinking of ways to diversify and go into training solutions, assessment solutions, and so forth. And I built all of those through deals. So for example, today, a core part of my business is offering leadership assessments and competency assessments on things, like behavioral traits on the job, emotional intelligence, and so forth. I actually have a partnership and deal with a US-based company. And the way the deal happened initially is we were having initial conversations about my ability to actually work with them. And they used to work only with big time clients. So like the minimum quantities that they needed, I just couldn't supply. So I came up with an idea. I'm originally from Beirut, Lebanon. I'm a native Arabic speaker and I have a lot of contacts there. That was a market which they weren't able to penetrate well. And they tried before, and it just happened through the flow of the conversation with the founder. I'm like, hey, I have an idea. I actually have a lot of business in that region. I can translate your solutions for you. I'll bear the cost of that, but you will give me access to exclusively sell in that region, right? Without that minimum quantity, because hey, I'm just getting started. I can't guarantee you that. So I traded in me putting in a small investment using my contacts to give them access to a market which they didn't have access to, and just working out. That deal is still active today. It's been 8 years almost, and it's been going smoothly. It's been growing year over year. So that's one example. But today, basically, I still have a lot of these relationships. Like, I think a big part of my business success is a lot of partners that a lot of people, when they talk to me, and I think to other similar people, is that a lot of these deals happen under the curtain, behind the curtains. The customer doesn't see any of that, generally
Right.
speaking. If someone meets me, they'll think it's a one-person operation. I'm doing everything on my own. But no, there's a lot of people in different parts of the world doing different things, that are helping me out. And I focus on what I do best, which is, delivering the kind of advice that I work with startups and helping them scale. But all the complementary pieces, I have a support team that helps me. And all of them are partners, either some are contractors, but a lot of them are actually partner entities that I work with that no one knows exist. But they're on the back end. They're part of the engine that gets everything running. And that's helped me actually grow because I handle more customers today than I've ever had. With a lower number of people on my team, the actual profitability has gone up significantly because I don't bear a lot of the operating expenditures of my partners. We have all these deals that work for both of us in different contexts. Everyone's happy. And that's kind of how I've been doing things, for, 15 years or so.
Love it. And listen, now, I mean, these types of deals have been done forever and, in various ways, but obviously the nature of the global economy and the ease of communication and, even certain platforms, if you're talking about contractors at a very basic level, certainly it's just made it so much more viable and easy and ability to find people and to even vet people and to, so more of an argument for this kind of stuff than there's ever been. Really.
Exactly. And especially in my space in the HR field, a lot of the companies I work with today, I've barely worked with a company in the past 10 years, maybe, that is exclusively local to the market they're in. And especially, with a lot of the companies I also tend to work with are in the technology space, the SaaS, health tech, and so forth. By nature of their business, it's a global business, whether you admit it or not,
Right.
because, you're online, anyone can come and ask for your services and you need to be ready to deliver on them. And that actually helped a lot. A lot of the partnerships I built actually gave me access to a lot of markets. I don't live in Europe. I've never lived in Europe, but I have customers in Europe. I've never even done any business development in Europe. It's my partners who actually refer customers to me. Right now, same thing in Africa, right? And so forth. So it's a lot of that growth, the global, has also come from the partnerships that have been able to develop over the years as well.
Love that. And when we use the word partnerships, that's the general term that people call it. But again, I mean, and you can give more specificity or not, obviously not names of, partners necessarily, but, like a partnership. I mean, you can have a contractual joint venture. You can co-own a company together, which is a company joint venture. You can have a contractual, a strategic alliance. You can have a contract agreement, and they're all business partnerships, so to speak. So do you have a way that you generally structure these partnerships, or are they dependent upon who it is and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think for me, it's dependent on, first off, what is the goal I'm trying to achieve? And second of all, the partner themselves. And also, because I also want to take into account what works for them, because I learned early on, when you might be a good negotiator or a good deal maker, so forth, but if you sway a deal too much in your favor, it doesn't last very long. Problems show up very early in the process, and you end up worse for it, because there's nothing worse than saying, okay, I found my partner in crime, and all of a sudden I need to reset this whole thing again. And that usually takes a lot of time to build trust, the relationships, the contact, and so forth. So for me, there's a few models that I would say are common amongst most of the partners that I deal with, right? The first one, where there's the typical standard referral fees, right?
Mhm.
That's one of the easiest thing to set up. I have a lot of those because there's people in markets which I don't work in, but that market is devoid of some of the skills that I bring to the table and the approach. It's an easy pass through, right? Hey, Nahad's a partner of ours. He works with us. You're in good hands. Whatever I bill them, hey, they get a check at the end of the month.
Yeah.
There's others where I'm actually a collaborator in the work that they deliver. So basically, when they're delivering to a customer, it's a joint operation. There's always this visibility that, hey, it's my entity and theirs. We're collaborating on that piece of work. So that's that. There's also some other types of arrangements where I've had where we loan each other resources sometimes, where, hey, some of my team, I can deploy people on my team to yours for that specific engagement, just like what the big consulting firms used to do with me. I actually do that with some other smaller firms. Like, hey, consultant A and B deployed will operate under your entity and so forth, right? We're invisible. We'll just support on the back end. So there's many ways that I've done it. There's also some companies, and I started doing this recently, given that I operate so much in the startup ecosystem, there's a lot of startups that have started coming to us and they're like, hey, we don't have the finances to invest in the services, but we will offer you equity if you're up for it.
Yeah.
So the last 2 to 3 companies actually helped. They've offered some form of equity, generally speaking, as well. And as part of the equity, it's not just like, hey, we're just going to give you a service like any typical service provider. We're actually going to be partners in your growth. So we're going to be sort of acting as if we have a real stake in the company, right? We're not majority owners, right? We just have a very small fraction, but we're going to be giving you really the full white glove service as part of this because we believe in this business. We think it has a lot of potential. We want to help you grow because, we succeed and you succeed. So there's a lot of different flavors to it. But for me, there's a common denominator. It has to work for me and it has to work for them. And whenever you try to, again, to overpower one or the other, you're starting off on the wrong foot.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. I feel like every time you speak, there's like so many things I want to break down, and we can't break them all down because we'll be here for 4 hours. But I want to hit on a couple of things. So one is this conversation of let's go reverse order, let's say like equity, right? So that brings up a lot of questions, right? I mean, I will make I think what's an easy assumption, and that is you probably have gotten offered equity in companies much more often than you've actually taken equity.
Correct.
That you said yes, right? Because a lot of companies offer equity. And listen, equity in a privately held company, small minority interest equity in a privately held company, in a lot of cases is never going to be worth anything, right? So those of us, it happens to me as well. We tend to be very picky when we take equity as part of a deal. You really got to believe that not only the company's going to do well, but that they have a monetization ability. Otherwise, your equity's a piece of paper, right? I mean, maybe it entitles you to some distributions and whatever, but largely when you're taking equity, you're usually looking for a capital event at some point, So that's one thing that
definitely.
I wanted to highlight. Yeah.
No, I agree. And when I look at these things, again, when we started talking, I mentioned that HR has to enable the business. And from my perspective, whenever I analyze or evaluate any deal, be it me working with a client or even taking equity or so forth, I study what the business fundamentals are. Like, hey, some things you mentioned, is this business viable? Is there an exit strategy? What is it? What's the monetization strategy? What's our potential? What's our EBITDA today? What is it going to be in a couple of years based on projections? So again, you don't want to take equity in a company where there isn't really going to be any value. But also, I think it's when I've learned that when you take the time to really vet these things and be upfront about, all the things that, hey, you think work, the things that you probably have some apprehensions about, things actually work out better. And the transparency is kind of the best thing when you're entering a deal that lasts. I mean, all the deals that I've had last a long time, they've been built in early days on, transparency and being upfront. The deals that have failed miserably have been the ones where something was just not revealed. There was bad intent, generally speaking, which is always unfortunate.
Yeah, totally. And, you raised something as well that was funny. I had a conversation this morning with somebody who will be a future guest on the DealQuest podcast. I won't tease it all that much, but let me just say this guy has negotiated deals, WTO, world trade deals, was involved with Brexit negotiations. Like we're talking about like very significant things. And he raised, I don't want to get into politics, but he did raise the concept in light of, let's say, a certain U.S. politician's negotiating approach and the fact that there's a difference between getting a deal signed or closed and having the deal really work, right? And it goes back to the point that you raised, which is that if you are able to leverage a much better deal for yourself in any negotiation, that really is not great for the other side, but they take it for whatever reason. Maybe they're desperate, they need the money, whatever, they want to get in, whatever it is. That's a deal that's never going to work. They're always going to be looking for a way to get it back, or they're not going to be as motivated. or whatever. So I love that you raised that, and it proves out, because you said you've had, I mean, such long-term partnerships, right? And nobody stays in an abusive relationship, so to speak,
Right.
longer than they need to. They only stay if it really is working.
Exactly. And there's also sometimes where deals don't work when you kind of try to rush into some without any bad intent from any other side. But I've been through some deals in my early days where I kind of rushed into the deal because I thought very short term, like,
Yes.
hey, I have this opportunity in front of me. I need that deal to make it work. But didn't think beyond that and didn't actually spend the time and effort to actually fully understand what I was getting into. And it got me into some really bad relationships that I had to really just run away from. So that's also something that's, bad deals don't always happen just because there's malintent from one part or the other. It might be because you haven't done the due diligence you need to do to think this out. Because again, true partnerships and true deals, they will only last if you think long term. Not only think, hey, it's not a quick buck or trying to take advantage on a very short term. Those really just don't play out well.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the other thing that, in what you said, is this conversation of deals that support each other with capacity, right? And that's a fascinating thing. And I think, that's like, we actually had a situation in my law firm in the first 2 quarters, or really first 5 months of last year, where we were growing. We needed to hire another attorney. We were interviewing for that. And then on top of that, so we were a little trying to catch up in terms of capacity to start with. And then my main senior associate went out on a significant family health situation. She scaled down and then was out for months. Fortunately, she's been back for a year now, and it's been amazing. But in that time, and then we were in trouble, right? So what were our options at that point? Or we could have rushed to try to hire anybody to get a body in, which of course that sort of goes to your rushing a deal, same thing with rushing a hire. And then who knows what quality we would have gotten, if they would have served the clients, that kind of stuff and whatever. But we did what we said, wait a second, hold on. We're in this group, we're in an entrepreneurs organization. Within entrepreneurs organization, we're in this subgroup called the MyEO Lawyers Group, and we know all these lawyers around the country, right? And we just put out a thing to them saying, hey, does anybody have any attorneys with excess capacity who are great M&A and corporate attorneys and whatever? And we got 3 or 4 of the firms that said, yeah, we have some excess capacity. And there was one in Cleveland, friends of ours who, had some good folks, and they happened to have some excess capacity at that point. Cut an economic deal. They made some money for people they were paying anyway. And we got proven, vetted, recommended quality talent to fill us, during the gap. And some people who come from more of a scarcity mentality or whatever, and I, people know I come from an abundance mentality, would be like, well, aren't they competitors of yours? And I mean, nominally they are. They do the same things we do. Their practice is, we have a nationwide practice, so we could come across them. They do stuff in the Cleveland area and beyond. But who can't, I mean, there are a million law firms out there. I'm going to be worried that I'm doing something, especially with people I know and trust, and who are like, hey, whatever you need, we got your back. So, this idea of, I think it's underutilized. I was last year's Deal Exchange conference for an entrepreneur organization that I run. It was a woman who had that exact issue. And I said to her, do you know the people in the industry, different industry, right? And she said, yeah. I said, have you reached out to them to see if they have an excess capacity? And she was like, no, but I should, And
No, I have an example like that from my personal experience. So there's a company that I know that is a direct competitor to, they offer very similar services. They're based in Dubai and they operate globally as well, right? They're a larger firm than I am. So I met the owner once during a trip to Dubai because I also had a lot of business there at some point. So over the years, again, we compete in the same markets even. So there are some customers where we would actually run into them doing a different engagement than we were.
Yes.
This is probably 8-9 years ago. So over time, we built a relationship to where there have been situations where I have completely outsourced work to them and they've done the same to me. Not because, we couldn't do it, but because what? This kind of work, they could probably do better than we could.
Yeah.
And being really just honest about it between ourselves, hey, why don't you guys do this, right? We're billing this to our customer, right? We'll pay you your fee. We'll put a little markup on it, right? And you're good. And again, they're direct competitors. But to your point, I love what you said, because a lot of times I think, especially with small to medium sized businesses, there is this panic that happens whenever you bring that situation up, right? But there's so many different options out there where doing a partnership of that sort to help yourself, you're actually hurting yourself, because the benefit you're going to get from a relationship like that is actually much better. The upside is much higher than the potential loss you're going to get. And at the end of the day, especially in service-based businesses, a lot of it, like service-based business, gets sticky if customers are happy with your service. Even if the pricing's different, offering's different. I mean, I've seen it firsthand. It's very difficult to get a customer to just jump ship by someone just popping through the door or even offering them a better price or so forth. Just because the relationship itself, it has that combo of like, yeah, you know what you're going to get, you know what you're paying for, what the outcome's going to be, and you go from there.
Love it. Anything else, whether it's, a deal story you haven't talked about, or lessons you learned, or maybe, no matter how great a deal maker we all are, we've always had ones that go bad. And you mentioned a couple of things early, but anything else come to mind that might be interesting?
Yeah, I think something I've learned, again, I did mention that deals have been really at the core of a lot of my ability to scale and grow. But I think I felt that at some point I became so reliant on thinking only about making deals.
Yeah.
Right. It became the default where I just didn't want to even put any effort into doing anything. Right. I'm like, hey, let me find someone who can do it. The problem with that, which I found out a while back, is that you dilute your ability as a company to deliver value and your competitive advantage, right? Because there has to be something that you do and you only will do regardless of what the business is and regardless of, all the opportunities. That's something I would say kind of hit me the past 5 to 6 years, because I think I was at a point where with all these deals I had, all these partnerships, like, okay, what should I be doing? What am I going to do? Right? I'm like, hey, this works, it's going well, but really, is this it? Like, okay, it took me time to like self-reflection, really just thinking of it like, hey, based on all the clients I've worked with, all the companies I've worked with and so forth, what are the things that always stand out? All the things that keep customers coming back to me personally and my team. And I identified those things. And those are the things that today, at all costs, I deliver with my team. Those things are always going to be in our entity. We're never going to outsource any of it. We're never going to actually maybe have a deal to actually have someone deliver on our behalf. It is our competitive advantage. It is what makes us who we are. But there's some things behind the curtains that we need to deliver those services and to deliver all that value. And that's where I think, for me specifically, the whole deal making is where I think of it right now. So it's no longer right now, hey, is there a deal for this, just blankets, just like a blanket question? It's more targeted right now. Hey, this is what we're great at. Okay, are we able to deliver it on our own today without any support? Yes or no? So I think that's how my mindset has shifted over the years, to where I think now I'm in a more comfortable place where deals are much more targeted and they're much more intentional, as opposed to being, let's just get any deal done with anyone. The more the merrier, hey, no one's complaining.
Yeah, I love that self-reflection, that distinction, because, you're right. And I'm not saying like, it sounds like you were still doing fine anyway, so it didn't go this far. But I mean, if you follow that other path to its extreme, right?
Which is what I was doing.
Which I'm not saying happens with you. You basically turn into a broker or a finder or a connector, and that's the only value you provide. And then once people are connected, right, at some point when the contract, you might have restrictive, like non-circumvention where people don't go directly, but people can find around that, or they wait out the period, and then they come back or whatever, right? There's a million things. And that's not, and you don't want to, as a lawyer, I'm saying you don't want to depend upon the legal rights. Okay.
Yes.
Those are backup, right? You want to have a business model that actually works, right? So I mean, that would be the extreme of the worst case scenario for somebody if they really went down that road, if you're not providing any value other than being a finder, broker, connector kind of thing, So I love that distinction. I love the clarity on, hey, we need to have a special sauce on something, right? Our value prop, what distinguishes us. But then there's all this stuff around that, which could only be, I think it's two categories of it, right? You said one that's sort of stuff behind the scenes that help you deliver that core stuff. Mm-hmm. And then there's also like ancillary stuff, right?
Correct.
Around the special sauce that you might also be able to use.
Yeah, exactly. And that distinction is amazing, because, I mean, the special sauce was always there, or else I wouldn't have done what I have, achieved what I've achieved. But the problem is it can easily get diluted in all the chaos around, the stuff that you have going on. It becomes more difficult to manage. And
Yes.
for me, there was a point in time where I was veering more towards deals, a little bit towards the extreme, because I was like, hey, this is actually an easy way to scale. I'm actually delivering more. My team's handling more. We're doing more. But at the same time, it's like there's certain things which we didn't have as much control over, which we wanted, right? We had all the legalities in place and so forth, but also there's the output, there's the quality of service, there's different things that sometimes you want to put your own spin and your own touch on. It's what your customer expects from you. And especially with recurring customers, is they're like, hey, this is what they expect from working with us. We need to make sure that we always deliver on that. And there's certain things which are non-negotiables that we have to handle, and everything else, the support side, we can work with others on. But it's gotten to a point, it's a very nice balance. It's a well-oiled machine where it's very clear where the line is for everything that we deliver. And not only for me, but also the people who work with me, they know very well that, hey, these are things that will always be done by us. These are things that, hey, there is potential opportunities for partnerships and deals, because they're not our competitive advantage. They're not part of our core offering. They're an ancillary offering or a support offering, whatever that is. And then we see, hey, what's the best way to deliver that, but also within the confines of what our customers expect from us.
Yeah. No, that's a phenomenal distinction. So many companies actually don't have enough of a deal maker mentality. And that's why I have this talk called there's a deal for that, right? Any business frustration challenge or problem you have in your business, there's a deal for that. But one of the things I say, and this relates back to what you're talking about every time I give that speech, is that just because there's a deal for that doesn't mean that you should do a deal, that you should use a deal. It's just another tool in the toolbox, right? There are certain things you should do organically, right? That you should do, in-house, that you should do, right, as well. And it's not an or, it's just another tool in the toolbox. And, your illustration is great because, I think there are more entrepreneurs who need to think more like a deal maker. You are sort of on the other side, like pulling back a little bit, and finding that balance and understanding that we have all these different tools, and one of them is deals, but there are other ways. And listen, there are many companies that are super successful without ever doing a deal. So organic growth can work. It's just that, like anything else, if you have more, options, more tools in the toolbox, more solutions on how you can fix a problem or take advantage of an opportunity, the odds are better. And, as evidenced by these companies we talked about early on in your bio and whatever, and the level of, when you have a company scale from 7 to 9 figures, we're talking about that's significant. That's, a couple of serious turns there.
Yeah, exactly. And to your point earlier, for me, I think of deals as an and, not an or even today. It's like, hey, it's your point. It's another piece of ammunition in my toolbox. It's something I can always look back to when I need to. And I agree that the way I've always operated is I think of all the different opportunities or all the different options I have to actually tackle something. And it's never one versus the other. It's, hey, maybe there's 2-3 things I can do simultaneously to actually make this work. Why not? But again, it's about, hey, what are you trying to achieve? What's the value there? Does it, and especially if it's something which is going to impact what you deliver to your customer, which to me is the most important here. Is this actually going to impact my customer in any negative way? Because you hope that a deal is actually going to make things better for your customer. It's actually going to make things much more valuable. It's actually going to make them want to work with you more and actually grow their business with you, because that partnership, that deal adds value to them as a customer. So those are kind of along the lines of how I like to approach deals in general. But my brain, I think, is always thinking of deals regardless, which is always interesting.
Love it. So before I ask you, my second to last question is going to be asking you to give contact information so people can find out. But before you do that, leading into that, we've alluded to it, right, in terms of types of client sectors, whatever. But I want to give you an opportunity to really talk about, like, who do you work with, who's your ideal client, size of company, industries, type like that, and then give people some information on where they can find out more about you.
No, thank you. Appreciate that. So the ideal companies I work with typically are early to mid 7-figure companies that are starting to experience some success, double-digit growth. Those companies that are starting to have increasing and accelerating pace in revenues, headcount growth, and so forth. Typically, their headcount sizes anywhere from like 20 to 40 to 50. That's where most of the customers actually come to me to actually start helping them, because that's usually an inflection point for the business.
Sure.
And scaling is a very tricky business. Not a lot of people know this, but more than half of scaling efforts actually fail.
Yeah.
And fail meaning is that they actually plateau. The company just fails to grow. The investment is actually much more than the return on it. Or sometimes the scaling actually bankrupts the firm.
Yes.
Because it's so premature to where the revenues don't even catch up and the company actually just falls flat. So it's a very sensitive time frame. So those are the types of companies I work with the most. In terms of industry, most of the industries I work with today are within the tech space, the software space, hardware technology, e-commerce, and fintech. Those are really the most ones I work with. Healthcare technology, mostly around the software product side of things. There's also a lot of work that I've done previously with companies in the retail space even and so forth. But it's been like the past 10 years have been so focused on the technology space, really, because those are really the companies that have the biggest number of representation in today's economy, but also the ones that typically have this kind of hockey stick curve a lot of time where they kind of need the kind of services that I offer, because I'm usually not the right person for a company which is very stable growth. It's a hum-ho, kind of operation, because I'm like, it's not a good fit because that's not what I specialize in. You can get anyone to help you with that and so forth. And that's kind of the operation. Those are the kind of companies that typically are, I would say, the ideal fit. And the people I work with typically are either the founders, the leadership team, the people who are making the decisions on these like big investments and big operational moves and so forth, to help them make the right decisions and really help the company scale, as opposed to, hitting some of those ceilings we were talking about earlier.
Right. So where can people find out more?
Yeah. So best way to find me, you can go to my website at organizedchaos.fyi. That's the name of the company, and which I felt was a very fitting name given the space we operate in. I can be reached on LinkedIn as well, or via email. It's hello@organizedchaos.fyi. I respond personally to all my emails and all my messages. So I'm always open to a chat for people who are interested in having a talk. They want to pick my brain for ideas and so forth. Happy to do that.
Great. So now my final question on the podcast is about my highest value in life, which is freedom. And for me, that means everything from freedom around the world for people from oppression to I've been an entrepreneur for decades and I haven't had a boss. What does freedom mean to you, and how does it impact your life and business?
Freedom to me is really having the ability to make the decisions you want and have access to the opportunities, that everyone else has access to. The reason I say this is because I originally come from Lebanon. It's a third world country where, having lived in the US for so long and so forth, you see how sometimes just being born in a place gives you more freedoms and access. It's kind of like just going to the casino and hoping you hit the jackpot in some cases. So I think freedom for me is, I dream of one day having like a world economy where everyone can work with everyone. There isn't a lot of red tape. There's opportunity. And I think we're getting there given what's happening globally, with the technology and the globalization of talent and so forth. But I think, freedom is really the ability to achieve your full potential, have the same opportunities as everyone else, and really being able to succeed and have the same opportunities of success as everyone else.
Thanks for being such a great guest on the DealQuest podcast.
Loved it, Corey. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. If you are interested in finding out more about my law firm, the services we provide to entrepreneurial and growing companies across industries all over the country, and my partner Brian Megan and I, and my amazing team, just head over to kupferlaw.com. That's kupferlaw.com. And if you want to follow more of my content, head over to my LinkedIn page where I post regularly. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.